They invited me to the gala, not as the wife, as the ghost. The ballroom glittered with champagne and lies, every chandelier dripping with light I had paid for. They wanted me there to watch him celebrate, to see her hand on his arm where mine used to rest, to remind me that some women are kept in mansions, and others are simply kept. But crystal has memory, and marble holds secrets longer than vows. I stood at the entrance in my emerald dress, the one he'd bought me 3 years ago, back when his whispers were promises instead of performances, back when I believed love could be permanent as the stone beneath our feet. Tonight, though, the reflection in that chandelier would show them something they had forgotten, something sharper than humiliation, something quieter than revenge. My name, not whispered in pity, signed in ink that couldn't be erased. The clutch against my hip held 3 pages, folded, legal, devastating. Documents that proved the billionaire celebrating his $300 million victory tonight had built his empire on a foundation he'd tried to bury. Me, before we go further, take a breath and stay close, because what happens tonight will whisper long after the lights fade. And some truths, they don't just destroy empires, they rebuild the women who were meant to rule them all along. The envelope arrived on ivory paper, thick, expensive, mocking in its elegance. I found it on the marble console table in the foyer of the home we'd built together, the home that was legally mine for another 60 days, until the divorce settlement finalized, and I became just another woman who'd loved a man more than he'd deserved. My fingers traced the embossed lettering. You are cordially invited to celebrate the acquisition of Montgomery Industries. His victory, his empire, his future standing on the grave of our past. I opened it slowly, the way you'd open a letter you know contains bad news but read anyway because ignorance feels more dangerous than pain. The details were printed in gold ink, date, time, black tie required, and at the bottom, in handwriting I'd once thought I'd see on love letters forever. It would mean everything if you were there. It would mean everything. The audacity of those 4 words made me laugh. A sound like breaking glass in an empty room. He wanted me at his celebration. Wanted me to witness the moment he ascended to billionaire status. Wanted me dressed in silk and diamonds, playing the role of the gracious ex-wife who'd moved on. Who'd accepted her place in his revised history, who'd disappeared quietly into whatever footnote he'd written for me. Through the French doors, I could see the gardens we'd planted 5 springs ago. Roses climbing trellises we'd chosen together, lavender bordering pathways we'd walked hand in hand, planning futures that turned out to be his alone. I'd been 25 when we met. He was 23, burning with ambition that had nowhere to go. All fire and dreams and desperation, working 2 jobs and taking night classes, trying to outrun his father's voice that said he'd never be anything. I'd believed in him first, when his own family called him foolish, when banks laughed at his business plans, when the world said no, I'd said yes. I'd said yes with my inheritance. $2 million from my parents' estate. Every cent I had. We'd incorporated Montgomery Industries together, signed documents with matching pens, toasted with cheap champagne in that cramped apartment that smelled like ambition and ramen and love that felt indestructible. I was the foundation, the first investor, the believer. The partner who stood beside him through 3 failed product launches, 2 investor rejections, and 1 midnight breakdown where he'd cried in my arms and said maybe his father was right. I'd held him, whispered that greatness takes time, that empires aren't built in comfort. And then, somewhere between year 5 and year 10, between the first million and the first 100 million, between the cramped apartment and this marble mansion, I became decorative instead of essential. The wife at company parties, the smile in photographs, the woman whose contributions were acknowledged with, "She's been so supportive," instead of, "She built this with me." My phone buzzed against the marble. A text from an unknown number. "Wear the emerald dress. He'll want to see what he's missing." Her, Vanessa. The mistress with the bright laugh and the carefully curated Instagram, and the kind of youth that made her think she'd won something by claiming a man who'd learned to discard partners like quarterly reports. She was 26. Beautiful in that way that doesn't know it has an expiration date. She probably thought their love was different. That she was different. that he'd never look at her the way he'd started looking at me, like a phase he'd outgrown, like an old version of software that needed upgrading. She'd learn. They always do, but not yet. Right now, she was still high on victory, still believing she'd claimed a prize from the wreckage of my marriage, still texting the discarded wife with casual cruelty, the way winners do when they forget that some games have rounds they haven't seen yet. I should have declined the invitation, should have maintained my dignity, taken the settlement, moved into a smaller house with my broken heart and my shattered belief in love, and started the slow work of rebuilding a life that didn't revolve around being his. But there was something they didn't know, something Marcus had forgotten in his rush to rewrite history, something buried in contracts signed 5 years ago, when trust was still a language we spoke, and partnership meant more than just a legal designation on paper. The company he was celebrating tonight, Montgomery Industries, valued at $300 million after tonight's acquisition, wasn't just his empire. It was ours. My signature was woven through its foundation like steel through silk. Equal partner, equal owner, co-founder on every document that mattered. 50% mine. And the acquisition he was celebrating? The $300 million deal that would make him a billionaire? According to our founding documents, it required both signatures. Both authorizations, both partners agreeing. I'd never signed. I walked to my office, the room he'd insisted I didn't need once the company grew beyond our home. Found the file I'd been avoiding for weeks, the one my attorney Margaret had flagged with a sticky note that said simply, "Read this. Call me." Inside were copies of every founding document, every contract, every agreement we'd signed when Montgomery Industries was born. And there, in black and white, in language that couldn't be negotiated away, the acquisition clause. Any transaction exceeding $10 million requires authorization from both founding partners. Signatures must be original, witnessed, and notarized. I pulled out my phone, dialed Margaret. She answered on the first ring. "You read it." I read it. And? I looked at the invitation again, at his handwriting, at the audacity of a man who'd tried to erase me thinking I'd show up to applaud. "And I'm going to the gala," I said quietly. "Good." Margaret's voice held something like pride. "Wear the emerald dress. Let him see exactly what he's losing." "I'm not doing this for him." "I know, sweetheart. You're doing this for you. But that doesn't mean he won't feel it." I hung up, picked up the invitation, and for the first time in 6 months, since the day I'd found the hotel receipt, since the confession, since the moment my marriage died in a penthouse suite that cost more per night than most people's mortgages, I smiled. Not from happiness, from something sharper, something that tasted like justice and felt like power, and looked like a woman who'd just remembered she'd been signing checks before she'd been signing divorce papers. They wanted me at the gala? I'd be there, but not as the ghost, as the reckoning. The dress hung in my closet like a ghost of better times. Emerald silk that caught light the way water catches moonlight. Subtle, devastating, impossible to ignore. He'd bought it for me 3 years ago, for a gala just like this one. Back when his hand on my waist still felt like home instead of performance. Back when I believed the whispers in my ear were promises meant for forever. I hadn't touched it since the night I found the receipt. Not for the dress, for the second one. Same designer, same season, same price point, different size. That's how betrayal announces itself sometimes. Not with passionate confessions or lipstick-stained collars, but with numbers on paper that don't add up. With credit card statements that tell stories your marriage pretends aren't being written. With a man who suddenly needs 2 of everything. 2 reservations, 2 bouquets, 2 women believing they're the only one. I'd asked him about it over breakfast. Casual, light. The way you ask about something when you're praying the answer will make sense. "Oh, that?" He'd barely looked up from his phone. "Client gift. You know how it is." I did know, knew the shape of his lies by then, knew the way his voice changed pitch when truth became inconvenient, knew that men who build empires learn to build alternative realities with the same skill. But I'd wanted to believe him. Needed to believe him, because if the dress was a lie, what else was? Everything it turned out. The late nights, the business trips, The distance that had grown between us like ice forming on a lake. So gradual you don't notice until you're standing on something that won't hold your weight anymore. I pulled the emerald dress from the closet now. Slipped it on. The silk moved against my skin like memory. Like the ghost of the woman I'd been when this dress was new. When I'd believed luxury meant love. When I'd thought being desired and being valued were the same thing. The zipper stuck halfway. I'd lost weight, not intentionally. Just the way you lose things when your life is falling apart. Appetite. Sleep. The ability to pretend everything's fine when you're dissolving from the inside out. I forced the zipper up. Adjusted the fabric. Studied my reflection in the full-length mirror that had witnessed 1,000 mornings of getting dressed beside a man who'd stopped seeing me somewhere along the way. The woman looking back was familiar and foreign at once. Same dark hair, now longer than I'd worn it during the marriage. He'd preferred it shorter, professional, contained. I'd spent 10 years containing myself. Same eyes, but different somehow. Harder, clearer. The kind of clarity that comes from hitting bottom and finding bedrock instead of more falling. Same body that had carried his child for 12 weeks before my body decided it couldn't. Before the miscarriage that had broken something between us that we'd never discussed. Never mourned together. Just moved past. The way you move past construction on a familiar route. Except some losses don't get moved past. They just get buried until they poison the foundation. My phone rang. Margaret, tell me you're not backing out, she said without preamble. I'm getting dressed. Good. Remember, tonight isn't about revenge. It's about reclamation. What's the difference? She laughed, low and knowing. Revenge makes you feel good for a night. Reclamation gives you back your life. Don't confuse the two. And if I want both, then you're human, sweetheart. But make sure you know which one you're choosing when the moment comes, because it will come. And you'll have about 10 seconds to decide who you want to be on the other side of this. I touched the diamond earrings on my dresser, the ones he'd given me for our 5th anniversary. Back when gifts still came with eye contact and words that sounded like feeling. Margaret? Yes? What if I'm not strong enough? What if I get there and I just break? Silence on the other end. Then, softer than I'd ever heard her. Elizabeth, you've been breaking for 2 years. Quietly. Privately. Perfectly. Tonight you get to break out loud. And when you do, every piece that shatters will be sharp enough to cut through the bullshit he's been selling as truth. She hung up. I put on the earrings, applied lipstick the color of arterial blood. Not because I wanted to look beautiful. Because I wanted to look like I'd survived something. Like I'd walked through fire and come out holding matches. The car service arrived at 7. Black sedan. Tinted windows. The kind of discretion that money buys when it wants to move through the world unnoticed. I'd ordered it myself. Paid for it from the account that was still technically joint, though Marcus had been slowly moving assets for months. Thinking I wouldn't notice. Thinking I was too heartbroken to pay attention to numbers. But I'd built my career in finance before I'd built his empire. And numbers don't lie the way people do. The driver opened the door. Mrs. Montgomery. Ms. Hartford tonight? I corrected gently, taking back my name, one correction at a time. The drive to the mansion took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of watching the city lights blur past. Watching the neighborhoods change from comfortable to wealthy to obscene. The kind of obscene that comes from forgetting what things cost when you never have to check price tags. We'd lived modestly once. That cramped apartment where we'd eaten ramen and dreamed in dimensions bigger than our square footage. Where love had felt like enough because we were building something together. When had enough stopped being enough? When had his ambition started requiring casualties? When had I become one of them? The mansion appeared at the end of a private drive. Lit up like a wedding cake. Like a monument to everything we'd built. And everything that had rotted beneath the beautiful surface. I'd chosen this house, walked through it when it was just empty rooms and potential, saw what it could become, hired the designers, selected every chandelier, every marble tile, every piece of furniture that made the space feel less like a house and more like a home. He'd signed the checks, but I'd made it beautiful. Another thing he'd forgotten. Another contribution erased by his rewritten history. The car stopped at the entrance. Through the windows I could see them. Hundreds of beautiful people in expensive clothes, drinking champagne that cost more than most people's car payments, celebrating a man they thought had built an empire alone. A man who'd learned to take credit like oxygen. Natural, necessary, never questioned. The driver opened my door. I stepped out. Gravel crunched under my heels. A sound like breaking glass. Like promises shattering. Like a woman who'd learned that sometimes the only way forward is through the wreckage. The doorman's eyes widened. Ms. Hartford, I said again, claiming my name, my identity separate from his, my right to exist as more than just the woman he'd left behind. He opened the door. The ballroom swallowed me whole, and somewhere in that crowd of champagne and lies, Marcus was about to learn that some foundations remember who laid them, even when the empire tries to forget. Crystal and gold, silk and diamonds, 1,000 people dressed in luxury, moving through the ballroom like beautiful ghosts who'd never known what it meant to build something from nothing. The chandelier hung overhead, my chandelier, the one I'd fought for when Marcus wanted something modern and cold. I'd wanted something that remembered the past while reaching toward the future, something that held light like memory. I'd won that argument. It was possibly the last time. Now it hung there, 20 feet of cascading crystal, throwing diamonds of light across marble floors I'd chosen, past columns I'd designed, through air thick with champagne and congratulations and lies so polished they looked like truth. I moved slowly through the crowd, not hiding, not announcing, just existing in a space that had been mine before it became his. Heads turned. Whispers started like fire catching silk. Is that... I thought they were... The audacity. She actually came. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. Let them try to make sense of the discarded wife walking into her replacement celebration, wearing emerald silk and diamond earrings, and a smile that knew things they didn't. A waiter passed with champagne. I took a glass. Let the crystal catch the light. Let everyone see that my hands weren't shaking. That I belonged here. That I'd always belonged here. Across the ballroom, near the orchestra playing something classical and forgettable, I saw him. Marcus, my husband for 10 years. My ex-husband in 60 days. My business partner forever. Whether he'd remembered to check the contracts or not. He looked exactly as I remembered and nothing like the man I'd married. Same dark hair, silvered now at the temples in that way magazines call distinguished. Same broad shoulders that had once felt like shelter. Same tall frame that had learned to carry power like other men carry briefcases. But his eyes, God, his eyes. They'd learned cruelty somewhere between the wedding and now. Learned to look through people instead of at them. Learned to calculate worth and find most people wanting, including me. He wore a tuxedo that probably cost more than our first car. Custom fitted. Perfect. The uniform of a man who'd convinced himself that success was measured in zeros, and women in square footage. And beside him, red everywhere, red dress, red lips, red nails like warning signs he'd never learned to read. Vanessa, the mistress, the upgrade, the newer model he'd traded up to when the original started showing signs of having opinions and needs, and a spine that wouldn't break on command. She was beautiful in that way that magazines worship. 26 and dewy, blonde where I was brunette, curves where I was angles. Everything I wasn't, which was apparently everything he'd wanted. Her hand rested on his arm. Possessive, territorial. The gesture of someone who thought she'd won something. Who didn't know yet that some prizes come with histories that don't wash off. I watched them for a long moment. Watched the way she leaned into him. The way he smiled down at her. The way they moved together like people who'd never had to rebuild trust after it shattered. Who'd never held each other through miscarriages or failed launches or midnight panics about whether the empire would hold. They had the easy part. The champagne and the galas and the version of him that came after I'd smoothed all his rough edges. I'd had the hard part. The building, the believing, the boy who cried because his father said he'd never be enough. But the boy was gone, and the man who remained had learned to throw away the people who'd built him. Marcus saw me then. His face went through a sequence of emotions so fast I almost missed them. Surprise, confusion, anger, and something else. Fear, just a flash. Just enough to let me know that some part of him remembered what I was capable of, what I knew, what I could do if I decided that silence wasn't the same as surrender. Good. Fear was the first honest thing I'd seen on his face in years. He excused himself from the conversation, started moving through the crowd toward me. Vanessa followed, her heels clicking against marble in a rhythm that sounded like warning bells. Too late. The warning had been sent months ago, in divorce papers and separation agreements, and the slow dismantling of a life we'd built together. But some warnings need to be delivered in person, in emerald silk, in a ballroom full of witnesses. Elizabeth. He said my name like an accusation, like I was the one who'd done something wrong by showing up to a party I'd been invited to. I didn't think you'd actually come. You invited me, I said mildly, sipped my champagne, let the bubbles dissolve on my tongue like tiny bursts of courage. It would have been rude to decline. Vanessa stepped closer to him, claimed her territory with body language. This is supposed to be a celebration, not... Not what? I met her eyes, saw the youth there, the confidence that comes from never having been broken. Not a reunion, not a reminder that some histories have longer memories than mistresses. Her face flushed. We're not... It's fine, I said softly, not cruelly, just factually. I'm not here to make a scene about the affair. That's old news, ancient history. I'm over it. Marcus's shoulders relaxed slightly. Then why are you here? To celebrate, of course. I smiled. Bright. Empty. The smile I'd perfected over years of company parties where I'd played the supportive wife. You're about to become a billionaire. Montgomery Industries' biggest acquisition. $300 million. That's... impressive. Thank you, he said carefully. Still trying to figure out my angle. Still trying to calculate the threat level. I mean it, I continued. Building a company from nothing? That takes vision, ambition, the courage to risk everything. I paused, let the words hang. And a really good lawyer to catch the things you might have overlooked. The color drained from his face. Vanessa looked between us, confusion blooming into concern. What's she talking about? Nothing, Marcus said quickly. Elizabeth, maybe we should talk privately. Oh no. I shook my head, set down my champagne glass on a passing tray, reached into my clutch. I think we've had enough private conversations, don't you? All those late nights discussing the company's future while you were building a different future with her? My fingers found the documents. 3 pages, folded, legal, devastating. I think it's time we had a public conversation instead. The music seemed to fade, or maybe the whole ballroom was holding its breath, sensing something. That animal instinct that knows when violence is about to happen, even when it comes wrapped in silk and whispered in civilized tones. What are you doing? Marcus's voice had gone very quiet, very controlled. The voice he used in boardrooms when negotiations were about to collapse. I unfolded the first page. Just sharing some interesting reading material I found, I said lightly. You know how it is. You're going through old files, preparing for a divorce, and you stumble across things you'd forgotten about. I held up the document. Let the chandelier light catch the letterhead, the official seal, the signatures at the bottom, like founding documents, for instance. Elizabeth! His hand reached for the papers. I stepped back, out of reach, into the light where everyone could see. Do you remember these, Marcus? From 5 years ago, when we incorporated Montgomery Industries together? The word echoed. Together, and somewhere in that ballroom, in the silence between heartbeats, destiny was already moving, already reshaping the narrative, already reminding everyone that some empires have 2 names on the foundation, even when only one gets remembered. Everyone's watching, Marcus said through clenched teeth. His smile stayed fixed, the mask of a man who'd learned to perform success even when it was crumbling. Put those away. We can discuss this later. Later? I kept my voice gentle, conversational. The way we discussed the affair later? The way we discussed the divorce settlement later? The way you've been discussing my erasure from company history later? A crowd was forming. Slowly, carefully. The way people gather around accidents. Unable to look away. Unable to help. Just witnessing. Vanessa's hand dropped from Marcus's arm. I don't understand what's happening. Let me explain. I turned slightly, including her in the conversation. Including everyone within earshot. 5 years ago, when Montgomery Industries was just a dream in a cramped apartment, Marcus needed capital. A lot of it. And no bank would touch him. Marcus's jaw tightened. Elizabeth. So I gave him mine, I continued, as if he hadn't spoken. $2 million. My entire inheritance from my parents. Everything I had. And we became partners. Equal partners. Co-founders. Isn't that right, Marcus? Silence. The kind that screams. These documents. I held them higher, letting the light catch every word. Prove that Montgomery Industries wasn't built by one man's vision. It was built by 2 people's investment, 2 people's signatures, 2 people's risk. A lawyer I recognized from previous galas stepped closer. Stephen something. Corporate law. He'd always been polite to me at parties. The way people are polite to wives they assume are decorative. May I see those? He asked. I handed them over. Watched his eyes scan the pages. Watched recognition bloom into shock. These are legitimate founding documents, he said slowly, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. They establish Ms. Hartford as co-founder and equal partner. 50% ownership. The murmur that rippled through the crowd sounded like thunder in the distance. Getting closer. That was years ago, Marcus said quickly. The company has evolved, restructured. Those documents are outdated. Are they? I looked at him directly. Let everyone see that I wasn't afraid. Wasn't backing down. Because according to page 2, section 7, any acquisition over $10 million requires authorization from both founding partners. Stephen flipped to the second page. His face went pale. Both signatures, I continued. Original, witnessed, notarized, no exceptions. What's she saying? Vanessa's voice had gone thin, high. The sound of someone realizing they'd walked onto a stage mid-performance and didn't know their lines. She's saying... Stephen looked at Marcus with something like horror. That if these documents are valid, and if Ms. Hartford didn't sign off on tonight's acquisition, then the $300 million deal you're celebrating is void. The word dropped like a bomb. Void. The crowd pressed closer. Phones were coming out now. Not obviously. But I could see them. Screens glowing in the dimness. Recording. Documenting. Turning a private celebration into public scandal. Good. Let them record. Let the whole world see what happens when men try to erase the women who built. You signed the closing documents, Marcus said to me. Quiet. Desperate. Your signature was on every page. Was it? 2 words. Soft as silk, sharp as a blade. His face changed. Understanding landing like a punch. I never signed anything, Marcus. I took the documents back from Stephen. I was never asked, never consulted, never even told the acquisition was happening until Margaret, my attorney, called to ask why I'd authorized a deal without reviewing the terms. That's impossible, he said. But his voice had lost its certainty. The signature was forged. I let that word breathe, let it settle over the crowd like fallout. Someone signed my name to documents I never saw, which means someone committed fraud, which means this entire celebration, this $300 million victory you're all toasting, is built on a lie. Chaos, questions erupting from every direction. Investors pulling Marcus aside, lawyers conferencing in tight circles. Vanessa standing frozen, her champagne glass trembling in her hand, realizing that the empire she'd thought she'd won was maybe just a house of cards. And Marcus stood at the center of it all, the billionaire who'd forgotten that foundations remember who laid them, watching his carefully constructed victory dissolve in real time. Elizabeth. His voice was different now, stripped of performance. Raw. Don't do this. Please. We can work this out privately. The settlement, I'll double it. Triple it. Just don't what? I stepped closer to him. Close enough that only he could hear what came next. Don't tell the truth? Don't remind everyone that you built this company on my money and my belief and my partnership? Don't reveal that you tried to erase me from the story you've been selling? I never meant to hurt you, he whispered. And for just a second, one breathless second, I saw something real in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or just fear of consequences. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. You didn't mean to hurt me, I repeated softly. You just meant to forget me. To rewrite history until I was just the wife who couldn't keep up. The woman who got left behind while you ascended. The sacrifice that greatness requires. That's not, isn't it? I held his gaze. When did you start telling people you built this alone? When did I stop being your partner and start being your, what? Your charity case? Your burden? The woman who'd served her purpose? He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the truth was written in every press release that mentioned only his name. Every interview where he talked about his journey from nothing. Every article that called him a self-made billionaire. Self-made. As if I hadn't existed. As if my inheritance hadn't been the seed. As if my belief hadn't been the soil. As if my partnership hadn't been the water that let his ambition grow into empire. Margaret appeared at my elbow. When had she arrived? Had she been here all along, waiting for this moment? We need to talk, she said quietly. Not to me, to Marcus. You, me, and your attorney. Now. Marcus looked at Vanessa. At the crowd. At the chandelier overhead that had witnessed our wedding reception 7 years ago, and was now witnessing something else entirely. The death of a narrative. The birth of a reckoning. This isn't over, he said to me. No, I agreed. It's not. But it's not going to end the way you planned either. He walked away. Margaret followed. Vanessa hesitated, then trailed after them like a ghost who just realized she was haunting the wrong house. And I stood there in the ballroom, in my emerald dress, surrounded by whispers and stares, and the wreckage of a celebration that had turned into confession. Someone handed me a fresh glass of champagne. I took it, raised it slightly toward the chandelier. To the truth, I whispered, and somewhere in the crystal above, light fractured into 1,000 small diamonds, each one sharp enough to cut through lies, each one bright enough to illuminate what had always been there, hiding in plain sight. My signature, my partnership, my empire too. They put us in the library, not the ballroom anymore. Too public. Too many witnesses with phones. Too much damage already done to risk more bleeding in front of investors who were probably already calling their attorneys. The library was all dark wood and leather and books nobody read. Decorative knowledge. The kind of room designed to make you feel like power has history, tradition. I'd chosen those books myself. First editions. Rare manuscripts. Real knowledge mixed with beautiful spines. Because even when you're building a house of lies, I'd thought, at least the foundation should contain truth. Marcus sat at one end of the mahogany table. Vanessa beside him. But separate now. Distance opening up between them like a crack in porcelain. She hadn't said a word since we'd left the ballroom. Just watched. Learned. Realized that being the mistress is easy until the empire starts crumbling. Margaret sat beside me, her briefcase open. Documents spread like tarot cards reading a future Marcus hadn't prepared for. His attorney, Richard something, expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive everything, looked at the papers with the expression of someone who'd just discovered a structural flaw in a building after the ribbon-cutting ceremony. These are legitimate, Richard said finally, reluctantly. The founding documents are airtight. Co-founder status, equal partnership, authorization clause. If Ms. Hartford's signature was forged. It was, I said calmly. Then the acquisition is void. The deal can't close. And depending on who forged the signature, there could be criminal implications. Marcus flinched. Just slightly. Just enough. I had no knowledge of any forgery, he said quickly. Too quickly. The way people deny things before they're accused. My assistant handles the paperwork. If something was signed without proper authorization. Your assistant? Margaret's voice was silk over steel. The one who's been with you for 6 months? Who wouldn't know the difference between legitimate authorization and forgery? Or are we supposed to believe she just independently decided to commit fraud on a $300 million transaction? Silence. Richard was scribbling notes. Probably calculating liability. Probably already preparing the defense. Probably wondering how much this was going to cost his client in more than just money. Reputation, I'd learned, was a currency that couldn't be deposited in banks. But it could be spent, quickly, publicly, irrevocably. What do you want? Marcus asked me directly. Bypassing the attorneys, bypassing the performance. Just man to woman, ex-husband to ex-wife, person to person who'd once promised forever and delivered barely a decade. I want what's mine, I said simply. The settlement was based on the assumption that I was just the wife. Just the woman you'd outgrown. Just another expense to negotiate down. I leaned forward. But I'm not just the wife. I'm the co-founder. And co-founders don't get settlements. They get equity. Vanessa made a small sound. Might have been protest. Might have been realization. Hard to tell. You want to keep your stake in the company? Richard asked, already calculating. Already trying to find the angle that cost his client least. I want recognition, I corrected. I want the company restructured to reflect reality. 50-50 ownership, equal decision-making power. My name on every document that matters. No more erasing me from the narrative. No more self-made billionaire stories that forget who made the first investment. That's, Marcus started. Fair, Margaret finished. Entirely, completely, legally fair. Given that she has grounds to sue for fraud, for breach of partnership agreement, for unauthorized use of her signature, and for about 15 other causes of action I've documented. She tapped a separate folder, thick with paper. I'd say recognizing her as equal partner is remarkably generous. We'd be tied together, Marcus said. Not to the attorneys. To me. Board meetings. Decisions. Negotiations. For years. Maybe forever. You want that? After everything? After her? He gestured to Vanessa without looking at her. I don't want you, I said quietly. Let the words land gently. Let him feel the weight of being disposable. I don't want your guilt or your apologies or your regret. I want what I built, what I invested, what I earned before you decided I was past my expiration date. Vanessa stood abruptly, chair scraping against hardwood. I need air, she said, voice tight, and walked out. Nobody stopped her. Nobody followed. She was realizing, I thought, that mistresses are only valuable when they're decorative. When the empire starts showing cracks, when legal battles loom, when the billionaire needs his co-founder back, the mistress becomes irrelevant, just another expense to negotiate down. Marcus watched her go. Something passed across his face. Loss, maybe. Or just the calculation of what it cost to keep her versus what it cost to let her walk. Love, I'd learned, looked a lot like accounting when you stripped away the poetry. If I agree to this, he said slowly, if we restructure the company, honor the original partnership agreement, what happens to the acquisition? We renegotiate, Margaret said. Properly this time. With both signatures, both authorizations, everything legal and transparent, and acknowledging that Montgomery Industries has two founders. The investors will demand price reductions, Richard interjected. The scandal alone will blow over, Margaret said smoothly. Eventually, assuming we can present a unified front. Two founders working together. A misunderstanding in paperwork. An oversight corrected. The alternative, she paused, let the weight settle, is fraud investigation. SEC scrutiny. Lawsuits from every investor who was told this deal was legitimate. Criminal charges for whoever forged that signature. She didn't say his name. Didn't need to. We all knew who'd had the most to gain from my signature appearing on documents I'd never signed. Marcus's hands clenched on the table. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a choice, I corrected. Honor the partnership we built together. Acknowledge my contributions. Give me what was always mine. Or watch your empire collapse under the weight of the lies you told to maintain it. That's the same thing. No. I met his eyes, held his gaze. Blackmail is forcing you to do something wrong. This is forcing you to do something right. There's a difference. The library was silent except for the ticking of the antique clock in the corner. The one I'd found at an estate sale. The one Marcus had said was pretentious, but I'd insisted added character. Time passing. Seconds becoming decisions. Moments becoming consequences. Fine, he said finally. Voice flat, defeated. Restructure the company. Equal partnership. Both names on documents. But I wanted in writing that this ends the divorce litigation. No more claims. No more surprises. We're partners in business. Nothing else. Agreed, I said. Margaret pulled out another document. Already prepared. Already anticipating this moment. That's why I paid her the retainer that could have bought a small car. She pushed it across the table. Sign here, she said to Marcus. And here, and here. He picked up the pen. Hesitated. This isn't how I wanted things to end between us, he said quietly. This isn't an ending, I replied. It's a correction. A return to what should have been all along. He signed. Each signature a small surrender. Each initial an admission that the story he'd been selling was fiction. When it was done, Margaret gathered the papers with the satisfaction of someone who'd just won a case without ever stepping into a courtroom. I'll file these Monday morning, she said. By the end of the week, Montgomery Industries will officially have 2 co-founders again. Congratulations, Elizabeth. You just reclaimed your empire. Not revenge, I thought. Reclamation. Maybe Margaret had been right about the difference after all. Marcus stood, looked at me one last time. I did love you, once. I want you to know that. I know, I said, and meant it. But love without respect is just pretty servitude, and I'm done serving. He walked out, left me alone with Margaret in the library of books I'd chosen, in the house I'd designed, in the empire I'd funded. Still mine, finally recognized. How do you feel? Margaret asked. I thought about it, really thought. Tired, I said finally, and free. And like I just won a battle, but the war isn't over. It never is, she said gently. But tonight you won what mattered. Your name, your place, your truth. She packed up her briefcase, and I sat there in the silence, in the library where knowledge lived alongside lies, and wondered what came next. Partnership without love, business without trust, empire without the illusion that we were building it together for reasons beyond profit. Maybe that was more honest anyway. Maybe the best relationships were the ones that named themselves clearly. Not marriage, just merger. And maybe that was enough. The Chapter 6, The Aftermath, 1,000 words. I didn't go back to the ballroom. Let them wonder. Let them whisper. Let the narrative write itself in my absence while Marcus tried to salvage his celebration with explanations that would never quite explain enough. The car service was still waiting. Same driver, same tinted windows, same discretion that money buys when it wants to disappear. I gave him my address. Not the mansion. The apartment I'd rented 3 months ago when the separation became official. When sharing space with ghosts of what we'd been became unbearable. Small temporary mine. The city blurred past the windows. Lights and shadows and lives happening in apartments and restaurants and corners I'd never see. All those people living their small dramas, unaware that somewhere tonight an empire had returned to hands that built it first. My phone buzzed. Text from Margaret. Sleep well, warrior. Tomorrow the real work begins. Tomorrow. Always tomorrow. Tonight felt like an ending, but it was just an intermission. A breath between acts. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and restructuring and the careful dance of unwinding fraud while maintaining the company's value. Tomorrow would bring investors demanding answers. Partners questioning stability. Competitors smelling blood in the water. Tomorrow I'd have to be the co-founder, the partner. The woman who'd just publicly destroyed her ex-husband's narrative and now had to prove she could help rebuild the empire without him. But tonight I was just tired. The apartment building appeared. Modern. Anonymous. The kind of place where neighbors don't ask questions and doormen don't remember faces. I'd chosen it deliberately. After a decade of living in a mansion where every corner held memory, I needed space that knew nothing about me. That didn't whisper about the woman I'd been, or judge the woman I was becoming. Neutral territory. The elevator was empty. Just me and my reflection in the mirrored walls. The emerald dress looked different now. Less like armor, more like costume, like something I could finally take off. My apartment was on the 14th floor. 14th. The number buildings skip in some countries because it sounds like death. But I'd taken it anyway. Sometimes death is just transformation wearing a scary mask. Inside, the space was sparse. Furniture I'd bought new. No antiques from the mansion. No pieces that carried history. Just clean lines and neutral colors and the kind of emptiness that feels like possibility instead of loss. I kicked off my heels. The silence was immediate. Complete. No staff moving through distant rooms. No Marcus's voice on conference calls. No sounds of a life that had required constant performance. Just quiet. I poured myself wine. Not champagne. Something red and heavy that tasted like endings and beginnings mixed together. Sat on the couch that faced floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. All those lights. All those lives. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably doing damage control. Reassuring investors. Explaining to Vanessa why his ex-wife now owned half his empire. Trying to salvage a victory that had turned into very public defeat. Did I feel bad? I searched for guilt. For regret. For some small piece of the woman who'd loved him that might whisper this was too cruel, too public, too devastating. Found nothing. Just the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd been erased and finally, forcefully, reminded the world she'd existed all along. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? Breathing on the other end. Then quietly, it's Vanessa. I should have hung up. Should have maintained the boundary between victor and casualty. Should have let her figure out her own mistakes without my guidance. But curiosity won. How did you get this number? Does it matter? Her voice was small, raw. I needed to understand. What happened tonight? What you did? Was it worth it? Destroying him like that? I didn't destroy him, I said calmly. I revealed the truth. If the truth is destructive, that's not my fault. But you did it publicly. Humiliated him in front of everyone. You could have handled it privately. The way he handled our marriage privately, the words came sharper than intended. The way he privately erased my contributions, privately forged my signature, privately rewrote history until I was just a footnote. Silence on the line, then softer. I didn't know about any of it. He told me you'd grown apart, that you wanted different things, that the marriage had just ended naturally. Did you want to know? I asked. Not cruelly, just honestly. Or did you want to believe the story that made you the heroine instead of the homewrecker? That's not fair. None of this is fair, I interrupted. Fair would have been him remembering I was his partner before I was his wife. Fair would have been honoring the contracts we signed when he had nothing and I had everything. Fair would have been a conversation before the affair, not an apology after. I could hear her crying now, small stifled sounds. I thought I loved him, she whispered. I thought we were different, that what we had was real. Maybe it was real, I said, surprising myself with the gentleness. But real doesn't mean lasting. And love without foundation is just pretty feelings that dissolve when things get complicated. Is that what happened to you two? I thought about it, really thought. No, I said finally. What happened to us was different. We had foundation. We had partnership. We built something real. But somewhere along the way, he started seeing me as part of the foundation instead of part of the empire. Buried instead of elevated. And you can't love someone you've decided to build on top of. What do I do now? She asked. Voice lost. Young. He's different, since tonight. Distant. Like he's looking at me but seeing someone else. He's seeing the cost, I said quietly. Of choosing pretty over partnership. Of trading history for novelty. Of forgetting that empires need foundations, not just decorations. Are you saying I'm just decoration? I'm saying you'll have to decide what you want to be. To him. To yourself. Because being the mistress is easy until the empire starts showing cracks. Then you're just another problem to manage. She hung up without saying goodbye, and I sat there with my wine and my view and my newly reclaimed empire, wondering if I'd been too harsh. Probably, But mercy was a luxury I'd stopped being able to afford somewhere between the affair and the forged signature. My phone buzzed again. Text from a number I'd deleted but still recognized. Marcus. I'm sorry. For all of it. You deserved better. 3 years too late. 10 years too late. A lifetime too late. I didn't respond. Didn't need to. Sorry was just a word people said when consequences arrived. It didn't undo damage. Didn't restore trust. Didn't return the years I'd spent making myself smaller so his ego could grow. Sorry was what you said when you'd lost. And tonight, finally, he'd lost something he couldn't buy back. The narrative, the history, the right to pretend he'd built it alone. I finished my wine. Changed out of the emerald dress into pajamas that cost less than the fabric in that silk. Washed off makeup that had held through revelations and negotiations and the careful dismantling of a man's carefully constructed lies. In the mirror, my face looked different. Older, maybe. Harder, definitely. But also, like I'd been looking at myself through fog for years, and it had finally lifted. This was who I was now. Not Marcus's wife, not his victim, not his forgotten co-founder. Just Elizabeth. Partner, fighter, woman who'd hit bottom and found bedrock instead of more falling, woman who'd signed her name in ink that couldn't be erased. Even when someone tried, I climbed into bed. Clean sheets. No memories embedded in the mattress. Just neutral space that held nothing but possibility. Tomorrow would bring complexity, challenges, the hard work of proving I deserved the empire I'd reclaimed. But tonight I'd won something simpler. My name back, my truth validated, my foundation acknowledged, and sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I slept without dreaming of chandeliers and marble and mansions built on lies. Just darkness. Just peace. Just the quiet victory of a woman who'd finally stopped disappearing. Monday morning arrived with rain. The kind that turns city streets into mirrors. That makes everything look softer, blurrier, like the world is crying or cleansing itself or both. I dressed carefully. Not the emerald dress. That was for battle. This was for business. Navy suit. Tailored. Sharp. The kind of armor that says competent without screaming. Pearl earrings instead of diamonds. Hair pulled back in a style that meant serious without severity. I was going to Montgomery Industries, not as the founder's wife, as the co-founder. For the first time in 5 years, I was walking back into the company I'd built with my inheritance, and my belief, and my stubborn refusal to let Marcus's dream die when everyone else said it would. The building stood downtown. 20 stories of glass and steel. Modern. Expensive. Everything the cramped apartment hadn't been. I'd watched them build it. 4 years ago. Watched my investment turn into infrastructure. Watched dreams become real estate. Marcus had wanted to name it Montgomery Tower. I'd suggested we just use the address. We'd compromised on his version. Of course we had. The lobby was all marble and minimalism. A receptionist I didn't recognize looked up as I entered. Young. Professional. Probably hired after the separation when they needed someone who wouldn't ask awkward questions about why the co-founder never visited. Can I help you? Elizabeth Hartford, I said. I have a meeting with the executive board. Her fingers flew across her keyboard. Eyes widened slightly. Oh, Ms. Hartford. Yes, they're expecting you. 21st floor. Corner office has been prepared for your use. Corner office. Not a conference room, not a visitor's space. An office, because co-founders don't visit. They occupy. The elevator was empty except for me and my reflection. I looked calm. Collected. Like a woman who'd walked into boardrooms 1,000 times instead of someone whose hands were trembling slightly inside designer pockets. Fake it until you make it, my mother used to say. Except I wasn't faking. I'd made this company possible. I'd just forgotten for a while that making and owning were the same thing. 21st floor. The doors opened onto executive territory. Plush carpets. Original art. The kind of space that whispers money so loudly it doesn't need to shout. Margaret was waiting. Ready? Does it matter? She smiled. Not really. Ready or not, you're about to walk into a room full of men who spent the weekend trying to figure out how to minimize your importance. Show them why that's impossible. The boardroom was exactly as I remembered. Long table, leather chairs, windows overlooking the city we'd helped build. Marcus sat at the head. Of course he did. Old habits, old assumptions about who led and who followed. 6 other executives, CFO, COO, general counsel, VPs of various territories, all men, all expensive suits, all watching me with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. They hadn't wanted me here, had probably spent the weekend with their own attorneys, trying to find loopholes in founding documents that Margaret had ensured were airtight. "Gentlemen," I said, took the seat at the opposite end of the table, not beside Marcus, equal to him. "Shall we begin?" The general counsel, Thomas, I remembered him from the early days, cleared his throat. "Ms. Hartford, we've reviewed the founding documents. Your claim to co-founder status appears legitimate." "It doesn't appear legitimate," Margaret corrected smoothly. "It is legitimate, documented, notarized, legal. Elizabeth Hartford funded this company with $2 million when it was nothing but ambition and paperwork. She signed as equal partner. Those documents have never been amended, superseded, or invalidated. The company has grown substantially since then," the CFO interjected. "The initial structure was appropriate for a startup. But Montgomery Industries is now a major corporation. The leadership structure needs to reflect 2 co-founders," I finished. "Which it will. Moving forward, any major decision requires authorization from both myself and Marcus. Any acquisition over $10 million requires both signatures. Both real ones this time." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Couldn't argue. The lawyers had made it clear. Fight this and risk everything. "What about day-to-day operations?" the COO asked. "Having 2 people sign off on every decision will slow everything down." "Then we'll establish clear domains," I said calmly. "Marcus handles technology development and product strategy. Those have always been his strengths. I'll focus on finance, partnerships, and investor relations. Those were my background before I became just the wife everyone forgot had a degree in economics." Silence. They'd forgotten. Of course they had. It was easier to see me as decoration than to remember I'd been qualified, educated, capable before I'd chosen to support instead of lead. "We'll need to restructure the board," Margaret continued. "Currently it's weighted 7-3 in favor of Marcus's appointees. It needs to be balanced. Equal representation." "That will take time," Thomas protested. "We have time," I said. "The acquisition can't close until the structural issues are resolved, until investors are confident that this company has legitimate leadership, transparent governance, and no more forged signatures." The words hung there. Forged signatures. Nobody wanted to discuss that part. The criminal implications. The fraud investigation that could still happen if I pushed it. But I wasn't going to push it. Revenge would have demanded prosecution. Demanded Marcus pay with more than just his narrative. But I wasn't interested in revenge. Just reclamation. "The board will be restructured within 60 days, Marcus said finally. First words he'd spoken since I arrived. Equal representation, joint decision-making, everything documented and transparent. "And the public statement?" Margaret prompted. Marcus's hand tightened on his pen. "We'll issue a press release by end of week, acknowledging Elizabeth Hartford as co-founder, clarifying that Montgomery Industries was built through partnership, correcting the narrative, correcting the lie," I said softly. His eyes met mine, held. Something passed between us. Not love, not even forgiveness. Just acknowledgement that we'd built something real once, that I'd been erased, that this correction was deserved. "Correcting the lie," he agreed. The meeting continued for 2 hours. Details about restructuring, timelines for the acquisition renegotiation, plans for damage control with investors who were already circling, concerned about stability. But the important part was done. I was no longer invisible, no longer the forgotten co-founder, no longer the woman who'd been buried in the foundation, while someone else claimed the empire. When the meeting ended, executives filed out, avoiding eye contact, probably already planning how to adapt to the new reality. Marcus lingered. "Your office is ready," he said. "Corner space. Whatever you need. It will set up your access today." "Thank you. For what it's worth." He hesitated. "You were always better at the business side than I wanted to admit. I was threatened by it. By you. by the fact that you saw patterns I missed. I know, and I'm sorry for forgetting that partnership means elevation, not competition. I studied him, saw the truth there. Also saw that truth came easier now that it cost him nothing to give it. Sorry doesn't undo damage, I said quietly, but acknowledgement is a start. He nodded, left, and I sat alone in the boardroom, where we'd just rewritten history, where my name had been restored to documents it should never have left. Margaret touched my shoulder. How do you feel? Strange, I admitted. Like I won, but I'm not sure what I won. An empire that requires me to work beside someone I can barely stand to look at. A partnership without partnership. A victory that feels hollow. Give it time, she said gently. Sometimes winning doesn't feel like winning right away. Sometimes it just feels like finally standing up straight after years of crouching. I thought about that, about the woman who'd made herself smaller, who'd apologized for taking up space, who'd believed that love meant disappearing so someone else could shine. That woman was gone. And the one sitting here, in a boardroom in a building bought with her money, running a company built on her belief, she was standing straight. Finally, let me show you your office, Margaret said. We walked down the hall, past conference rooms and executive assistants and all the infrastructure of empire. My office was at the corner, windows on 2 walls, view of the city spreading out like possibilities. Inside was furniture I hadn't chosen, art I'd never seen, a space that knew nothing about me yet. Perfect. I could make it mine. Could fill it with my own vision instead of trying to fit into someone else's aesthetic. Could build something new in space that held no history. On the desk was a single item, a nameplate. Elizabeth Hartford, co-founder and chief strategy officer. I picked it up, felt the weight of brass and truth. My name, my title, my place, finally visible. Finally acknowledged, finally home. What happens now? I asked Margaret. She smiled. Now? You build. Again. Differently. But you build, because that's what founders do. They create. Even from ruins. Especially from ruins. She left, and I stood in my corner office overlooking the city, holding my name in my hands. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Board meetings with Marcus. Investors to reassure. A company to rebuild while dismantling the lie it had been built on. But today I'd reclaimed my foundation. And foundations I'd learned were where empires began, not where they buried women who'd become inconvenient, but where women like me returned, remembered who they were, and started building again. The press conference was scheduled for Friday, 5 days after the gala. 5 days of lawyers and restructuring and carefully worded statements that tried to make scandal sound like clarification. 5 days of learning to walk into Montgomery Industries like I belonged there. Because I did. I'd just forgotten for a decade. The conference room was packed. Journalists from every major outlet. Financial reporters. Technology press. Even gossip columnists who'd smelled blood in the water and wanted front row seats to watch a billionaire bleed. I stood backstage with Margaret, adjusting my suit jacket for the 100th time. Stop fidgeting, she said gently. You look perfect. Powerful. Like exactly what you are. A woman who built an empire and is tired of being erased from the story. What if I freeze? What if I say something wrong? Then you'll be human. She squeezed my hand. But you won't freeze. You've been practicing this speech for 10 years. You just didn't know it until now. Marcus was already on stage. I could see him through the curtain gap. Composed, professional, the mask firmly in place. Beside him, an empty chair with my nameplate. Equal billing. Finally. Ready? Margaret asked. I took a breath. Thought about the cramped apartment. The $2 million. The belief I'd given freely when no one else would. The woman I'd been, and the woman I'd become, and the distance between them. Ready? I said. The stage lights were blinding. Cameras clicked like insects. A wall of lenses and recorders and people waiting for the narrative they'd been sold to, either be confirmed or destroyed. I sat beside Marcus, close enough to present unity, far enough to maintain truth. We weren't partners in anything but business anymore, and even that partnership was still learning to breathe. Marcus spoke first. His voice carried the practiced cadence of someone who'd given 1,000 speeches. Thank you all for coming. I know there's been speculation over the past week about Montgomery Industries and its founding. I'm here today to clarify the record and correct an omission that should never have occurred. He paused, looked at me. Something passed between us. Acknowledgement, maybe, or just the understanding that we were both performing now. For different audiences, with different goals. Montgomery Industries was not built by one person, he continued. It was built by two. Myself and Elizabeth Hartford. She provided the initial capital, $2 million from her inheritance, when no bank would invest. She co-signed the incorporation documents. She was and is an equal partner in this company's creation. The room erupted. Questions shouted over each other, cameras flashing, the sound of narrative shifting in real time. Marcus held up his hand. For reasons I deeply regret, Elizabeth's contributions have been minimized in public discussions of the company's history. That was wrong. It was unfair. And it ends today. He sat back, gestured to me. My turn. I leaned toward the microphone. The room went quiet. That particular silence that means everyone's listening. Everyone's recording. Everyone's waiting to see if you'll falter. Thank you, Marcus, I said. Voice steady, surprising myself with its strength. I want to be clear about something. I'm not here today seeking sympathy or playing victim. I'm here because the truth matters. Because women's contributions to building companies, to funding ventures, to taking risks, those contributions deserve recognition. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. I nodded. Ms. Hartford, there are reports that your signature was forged on recent acquisition documents. Can you comment? Margaret had prepared me for this. The dangerous question. The one that could turn acknowledgement into criminal investigation. There was a documentation issue, I said carefully. Authorization that should have been obtained wasn't. That's being corrected. The acquisition will be restructured properly, with appropriate oversight from both co-founders. Are you pressing charges? I'm focused on moving forward, not backward. On building, not destroying. Another hand. Male reporter. Skeptical expression. Some are saying you're only coming forward now because of the divorce. That this is revenge dressed as justice. The question hung there. Accusatory, dismissive. I met his eyes directly. I'm coming forward now because I was invited to a celebration of my own company and realized my name wasn't on anything. Not the press releases. Not the speeches. Not the history being sold to the world. I paused. Tell me, if you'd invested everything you had into building something, would you sit quietly while someone else took credit? Or would you remind the world that foundations matter? That the people who believe first deserve recognition? Silence. Then a different voice. Female. Warmer. What's your role moving forward? Chief Strategy Officer, I said. I'll be focusing on financial partnerships, investor relations, and ensuring Montgomery Industries maintains the integrity that should have existed all along. Marcus will continue leading technology development and product strategy. We'll work together as equal partners, making major decisions jointly. Can you work with your ex-husband? The question everyone wanted answered. I glanced at Marcus. He looked back. No warmth there. No lingering affection. Just professional assessment. We built something real once, I said slowly. That foundation still exists. Whether the building on top remains standing depends on both of us honoring what that foundation was. Partnership, trust, mutual respect. Those got lost somewhere. We're finding them again. Do you still love him? Personal question. Invasive. But also the one that would determine how this story got told. Vindictive ex-wife or wronged partner? I love what we built together, I said carefully. The company. The dream we started in a cramped apartment when all we had was belief and stubbornness. That deserves love. That deserves protection. What exists between Marcus and me personally? That's private. But professionally, we're committed to honoring what we created. More questions. About the acquisition timeline, about board restructuring, about investor confidence and market reaction, and all the technical details that would determine if Montgomery Industries survived this scandal. Margaret fielded most of them. her attorney voice calm and precise and leaving no room for misinterpretation. Finally, Marcus stood. "Thank you all for coming. We'll be releasing detailed statements about the restructuring by end of day. For now, I'll say this. I made mistakes. I took credit that should have been shared. I allowed my ego to erase someone who deserved elevation. Those mistakes end today." He looked at me then, really looked. "Elizabeth Hartford is not just my co-founder. She's the reason Montgomery Industries exists. And I'm grateful, genuinely grateful, that she's fighting for what's hers instead of accepting what I tried to give her." It was the closest to genuine apology I'd heard from him. Not perfect. Not enough to undo years of erasure. But something. The press conference ended. We stood for photos, together but separate, professional but not warm, the visual representation of partnership without pretense. Backstage, Marcus stopped me. "That was good. What you said, about foundations and belief. It was true. I know." He hesitated. "For what it's worth. I meant what I said out there, about being grateful you're fighting. Are you?" I studied him. "Or are you just grateful I'm not pressing charges?" He smiled sadly. "Both, probably. I'm not noble enough to separate gratitude from relief." At least he was honest about that. "We have a board meeting Monday," I said. "Investor calls Tuesday. The acquisition renegotiation starts Wednesday. This partnership, it's going to be hard, complicated. We're going to hate each other some days. Probably. But we're going to make it work. Because what we built deserves better than our personal damage." He nodded, extended his hand. "Partners?" I looked at his hand. Thought about all the times I'd held it. In love, in celebration, in grief when we'd lost the baby, in hope when the company started succeeding. This handshake was different. Not romantic, not even friendly, just contractual. Two people agreeing to honor what they'd built even if they couldn't honor what they'd been. I shook his hand. "Partners." His grip was firm, brief, professional. Then he left, and I stood backstage at a press conference that had just rewritten history, feeling strange and powerful, and somehow both victorious and hollow. Margaret appeared with her phone. "It's trending. Montgomery truth. The narrative is shifting. You're being called a feminist icon, a wronged founder, the woman who refused to disappear. Is that what I am?" She smiled. "You're whatever you decide to be, but right now you're visible, acknowledged, written back into the story you never should have left." My phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "I watched the press conference. You were magnificent. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, that you were always the foundation. V. Vanessa, the mistress who'd learned too late that empires need more than decoration." I didn't respond. Didn't need to. She'd figure out her own path, learn her own lessons, decide if she wanted to be someone's trophy or someone's equal. That wasn't my battle anymore. Mine was walking into board meetings with my head high, signing documents with my real signature, building the empire I'd funded back into something worth the investment, starting with myself. "Come on," Margaret said. "I'm buying you lunch, somewhere expensive, where we can toast to women who refuse to be footnotes." I liked the sound of that. We walked out together, through halls now familiar, past security who nodded respectfully, into elevators that rose toward ground level and the city beyond. My city, my company, my empire. Finally, truthfully, undeniably mine. The rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through clouds. The kind of light that makes everything look cleansed, renewed. Like the world had cried and was ready to start again, I stepped onto the sidewalk. Breathed in air that tasted like freedom and truth and the particular satisfaction of someone who'd been buried and clawed their way back to the surface. Still breathing, still fighting, still here. And that was its own kind of victory. The acquisition closed on a Tuesday, 6 months after the gala. 6 months of renegotiation and restructuring and learning to build an empire with someone you could barely stand to look at. 6 months of board meetings where Marcus and I spoke in professional tones, where we debated strategy and finances and vision without letting personal history bleed through. 6 months of proving I belonged, not just as the woman who'd funded the beginning, but as the leader who could sustain the middle and build toward the future. The number was different now. Not 300 million, 275. The scandal had cost us. Investors had demanded price reductions, guarantees, proof that Montgomery Industries had stable leadership despite the very public revelation that its foundation had been built on lies. But we'd closed it. Both signatures, both authorizations, both co-founders standing together for the cameras, shaking hands with the acquiring company's CEO, smiling like partners who'd never forgotten each other existed. Performance, yes, but also truth. We'd rebuilt something functional from the wreckage of what we'd been. Not marriage, not even friendship, just partnership. The kind that works because both parties remember that business requires respect, even when love has died. After the signing, there was champagne, toasts, congratulations from board members and investors and all the people who'd questioned whether I could do this. Whether a woman who'd been erased could unerase herself. Whether claiming your foundation was the same as proving you could build on it. I'd proven it. One board meeting at a time. One negotiation at a time. One decision that showed I understood strategy and finance and leadership beyond just writing the first check. Marcus found me on the balcony of the conference room. 21st floor. City spreading below us like a map of possibilities. "Congratulations," he said. "You did it. Closed the biggest deal in company history." "We did it," I corrected. "That's the point, isn't it? We're partners now. Really. Not just on paper." He smiled. Tired but genuine. "Yeah, we are." He paused, looking out at the skyline. I never apologized properly. For all of it. The erasure, the affair, the forged signature. All the ways I tried to make you smaller so I could feel bigger. "No," I agreed. "You never did." "I'm sorry, Elizabeth. Genuinely. Completely. You deserved better than what I gave you." The words hung between us. Too late to save the marriage, but maybe early enough to save the partnership. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For saying it, for meaning it, for learning the difference." "Are we okay?" he asked. "Not married, not what we were, but okay enough to keep building this?" I thought about it. About the woman I'd been at the gala 6 months ago. Desperate to be seen. Willing to destroy to be acknowledged. Running on rage and heartbreak and the particular fury of someone who'd been buried alive. That woman was gone. Or maybe just evolved into someone who understood that revenge and redemption weren't the same thing. That destroying him wouldn't rebuild me. That reclaiming my foundation was never about tearing down his empire. Just about remembering I'd laid stones too. "We're okay," I said finally. "Not friends. Probably never will be. But we're okay enough to honor what we built, to keep building, to be the partners we should have been all along." He nodded, extended his hand again. That gesture we'd repeated so many times now. Professional, contractual. The physical representation of choosing partnership over everything else we'd been. I shook it. "Partners." "Partners," he agreed. He went back inside. To the celebration. To Vanessa, who I'd noticed standing in the corner, looking uncomfortable. They were still together somehow. Still navigating whatever relationship could survive that much public humiliation. Not my problem anymore. Not my marriage to fix or my heartbreak to feel. Just their journey. Same as mine was mine. Margaret joined me on the balcony. "How does it feel? Closing day?" "Strange," I admitted. I thought it would feel more triumphant. Like vindication or justice or revenge finally landing. But it just feels normal. Like this is what I was supposed to be doing all along. "That's because it is," she said gently. "You were always supposed to be here, building, leading, making decisions that shaped empires. You just took a detour through believing someone else's narrative about your worth. A decade-long detour, but not permanent. You found your way back." I looked at the city. At Montgomery Industries reflected in glass buildings. At the empire I'd funded and forgotten and finally, forcefully reclaimed. "What happens now?" I asked. Margaret smiled. "Now? You build more. Bigger. Better. You show every woman who's been told she's just the wife, just the support system, just the foundation someone else gets to build on. You show them that foundations can rise, can become empires themselves, can refuse to stay buried. That's a lot of pressure. You've been handling pressure for 6 months. Board meetings with your ex-husband. Investor skepticism. Media scrutiny. Proving daily that you deserve the title you always had. She squeezed my shoulder. I think you can handle being an example. My phone buzzed. Email from an investor group in Singapore. They'd been following the Montgomery Industries story. Wanted to meet. Discuss funding a new venture. With me specifically, not Montgomery Industries, just me, Elizabeth Hartford, co-founder, chief strategy officer, woman who'd refused to disappear. Looks like you have options, Margaret observed, reading over my shoulder. Options. When was the last time I'd had those? Before the marriage consumed my identity. Before I became Marcus's wife, instead of Elizabeth. Before I forgot that I'd had ambitions too, dreams too, vision beyond just supporting someone else's. I'm not leaving Montgomery Industries, I said. Not after fighting to reclaim it. Who said anything about leaving? Margaret smiled. But co-founders can have side ventures, can build new things while maintaining the old, can prove they're not just defending territory but expanding it. Expanding. The word felt like possibility. I looked at the email again. Singapore investors. New venture. My name. My vision. My foundation this time. With no one to erase it. Think about it, Margaret said. You have time. You've earned time. She left me alone on the balcony. Alone with the city and the empire and the future that suddenly felt wider than it had in years. I'd spent 6 months proving I could reclaim what was mine. Maybe the next chapter was proving I could build something new. Something with only my name on the foundation. Something that couldn't be erased because I'd never let anyone convince me to shrink. The sun was setting. Golden light painting buildings orange and pink. That magic hour when everything looks softer. Kinder. Like the world is taking a breath between day and night. Between what was and what could be. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something made me. Hello? Ms. Hartford? This is Sarah Chen from Forbes. We're doing a feature on women rebuilding after public betrayal. Your story, the way you reclaimed your company, it's inspiring a lot of people. Would you be willing to be interviewed? Forbes. Not as Marcus Montgomery's ex-wife. As Elizabeth Hartford. Co-founder. Leader. Woman worth interviewing on her own merit. Yes, I said. I'd be willing. We scheduled the interview. She hung up. And I stood there on the balcony, watching the city transition from day to night, feeling something shift inside me. Not revenge, not even redemption, just recognition that I'd been lost for a while, had forgotten my name in the shadow of someone else's ambition, had believed that love meant disappearing so someone else could shine, but I'd found my way back, had clawed through erasure and emerged with my signature intact, had proven that foundations don't have to stay buried. Sometimes they rise. Sometimes they become empires themselves. Sometimes they remember they were always meant to build, not just be built upon. I went back inside. To the celebration. To the champagne and congratulations and the future that we'd secured through 6 months of difficult, complicated, surprisingly functional partnership. Marcus was laughing at something an investor said. Vanessa beside him, still trying to find her place in a narrative that had shifted beneath her feet. They looked happy enough, or at least content. I didn't feel anger anymore. Didn't feel heartbreak. Didn't even feel the satisfaction of revenge. Just neutral, like looking at a chapter of my life that had closed. Not with a slam. Just with the quiet click of a door shutting properly. Finished, complete. Behind me now. Margaret raised her glass. To Elizabeth Hartford, co-founder, chief strategy officer, and the woman who taught us all that some foundations refuse to stay buried. The room echoed her toast, and I stood there, in the empire I'd reclaimed, surrounded by people who finally saw me clearly, thinking about Singapore investors and Forbes interviews and all the possibilities that came from remembering your worth. The chandelier overhead, different from the one at the gala, but similar, threw light across faces and glasses and the future we'd all just signed into existence. And I realized something. Victory didn't feel like I'd expected. Didn't feel like triumph or vindication or revenge finally landing. It felt like standing straight after years of crouching, like breathing deep after years of holding breath. Like finally remembering that you were never meant to disappear, just to become. And I was becoming, day by day, decision by decision, signature by signature, becoming the woman I'd always been meant to be. Before love taught me to shrink, before marriage made me forget, before empire required burial, just Elizabeth, co-founder, leader, woman who'd hit bottom and found bedrock and built herself back up from foundation to full structure, still here, still building, still refusing to be footnote in someone else's story, writing my own instead. 1 year after the gala, the invitation came on ivory paper again. Thick, expensive, but not mocking this time. Montgomery Industries' annual gala, celebrating partnership, innovation, and the future. The same ballroom, the same chandelier, the same marble floors that had witnessed my erasure and my reclamation. But everything was different now. I stood in my apartment. Larger now. No longer temporary. Filled with furniture I'd chosen and art I loved. And the kind of permanence that comes from building a life instead of just surviving one. The dress hanging in my closet wasn't emerald this time. Midnight blue. Silk that caught light differently. Subtler. Deeper. The color of sky after sunset but before full dark. The color of transition. I'd designed it myself. Worked with a designer who understood that some dresses aren't costumes. They're armor. They're statements. They're the physical representation of who you've become. This dress said, I survived. I rebuilt. I'm still here. But it whispered instead of screamed, because I didn't need to scream anymore. My phone buzzed. Text from Margaret. Ready for round 2? I smiled. Typed back. This isn't round 2. This is a victory lap. Because it was. In the years since the documents and the restructuring and the very public reclamation of my foundation, Montgomery Industries had grown. Thrived, even. The acquisition had integrated smoothly. Stock prices had recovered. Investor confidence had returned. And my name was on everything now. Press releases. Annual reports. The company website that listed both co-founders with equal prominence. Elizabeth Hartford and Marcus Montgomery. The names that had always belonged there. Finally visible. The Singapore investors had funded my side venture. A startup focused on supporting women entrepreneurs, providing capital and mentorship, and the kind of belief I'd once given Marcus. But this time, my name was on the foundation in permanent ink. This time, nobody could forget who'd laid the first stone. The Forbes interview had gone viral. I'd been on 3 more magazine covers since then. Speaking engagements, podcast interviews, opportunities that came from refusing to disappear quietly, from being the woman who'd clawed her way back to the surface, and then extended a hand to others still buried. I put on the midnight blue dress. It fit perfectly, unlike the marriage. Unlike the narrative I'd believed. Unlike the version of myself I'd tried to squeeze into for a decade. This fit. The car service arrived. Different driver. Same discretion. Same tinted windows that let you move through the world unseen when you But I was done being unseen. The mansion appeared at the end of the drive, lit up like last year. But this time, my name was on the invitation, my contributions acknowledged. My presence requested not as ghost, but as co-host, equal partner in celebration as in everything else. I stepped from the car. Gravel crunched under heels that no longer trembled. The doorman smiled. Ms. Hartford, welcome back. Back, not home. This would never be home again, but back to the empire I'd funded. Back to the ballroom I'd designed. Back to the chandelier I'd fought for. Back to claim space that had always been mine. The ballroom swallowed me whole, but differently this time. Not as consumption, as embrace. Heads turned. Whispers started. But not with scandal. With recognition. With respect. With the particular energy that greets someone who's proven they belong. The chandelier hung overhead. Same cascade of crystal. Same memory held in glass and light. I looked up at it. Remembered standing here a year ago with documents in my clutch and rage in my throat and desperation to be seen. Now I looked at it with quiet satisfaction. The kind that comes from knowing you don't have to fight anymore. You've already won. Marcus found me near the orchestra. He looked older. Tired in a way that success doesn't fix. Lines around his eyes that came from learning hard truths about himself. Elizabeth, he said, you look radiant. Thank you. I mean it. There's something different. Lighter. I'm not carrying your narrative anymore, I said simply. Turns out that was heavy. He smiled sadly. Yeah, I'm learning that too. Carrying lies gets exhausting. Vanessa was notably absent. They'd broken up 4 months ago. Quietly. No scandal. just the natural dissolution of something built on shaky foundation. He'd tried to build on decoration again. And decoration, like always, had proven insufficient. "How are you?" I asked. Genuine curiosity. Not love, not even friendship. Just human interest in someone you once knew intimately. "I'm learning," he admitted. "That success without integrity is just expensive emptiness. That empire without respect is just real estate. That I had something real with you and I destroyed it trying to upgrade." "You didn't destroy me," I corrected gently. "You tried. But foundations are harder to break than you realized." "I'm glad," he said. And meant it. "I'm glad you fought back. Glad you refused to disappear. Glad someone taught me that some women don't stay buried. I didn't do it for you." "I know, that's what makes it powerful." The music shifted. The same crystal note that meant attention was about to be demanded. This time we walked to the center together. Co-founders, equal partners. Two names on the foundation that had become empire. Marcus took the microphone first. "Thank you all for coming. Last year's gala was memorable for reasons I deeply regret. This year, I hope, will be memorable for better ones." He looked at me, genuine warmth in his eyes. Not love, just respect. Montgomery Industries exists because two people believed, two people invested, two people built. For too long, I let the world believe it was just me. Tonight, I want to correct that one final time. He handed me the microphone. The room went silent. "A year ago," I said quietly, "I stood in this ballroom and demanded recognition, demanded acknowledgement, demanded my name be restored to the story it should never have left." I paused, let the memory settle. Tonight, I stand here not demanding anything, just existing, building, leading, being the co-founder I always was, with or without acknowledgement. I looked around the room, at investors who doubted me, at board members who'd questioned me, at all the people who'd wondered if reclaiming foundation was the same as proving you could build. "We closed the biggest acquisition in company history," I continued. "Launched 3 new products, expanded into 5 new markets. And we did it together, as partners, as equals, as two people who learned that empire requires more than one name on the foundation." Applause rippled through the crowd. Not scandal this time. Recognition. "So tonight," I finished, "we celebrate partnership. Real partnership. The kind that respects contribution, that honors foundation, that remembers the people who believed first." I raised my glass. To Montgomery Industries. To everyone who built it. To the future we're creating together. "To partnership," Marcus echoed. The room erupted in applause. And I stood there, in the ballroom where I'd been erased and reclaimed, under the chandelier that had witnessed both versions of my story, feeling something I hadn't expected. Peace, not happiness, not triumph, not even satisfaction. Just peace, the quiet certainty of someone who knows their worth, who's claimed their space, who's written themselves back into the narrative so permanently that no one could erase them again. After the speeches, after the toasts, after the celebration had settled into comfortable hum of success acknowledged, I found myself on the balcony. Same view as a year ago, same city, same stars, but different woman looking at them. Margaret joined me. "How does it feel? Full circle?" "Not full circle," I said slowly. "More like spiral. I'm back where I started, but higher, changed, evolved. That's growth. That's survival. Same thing sometimes." We stood in comfortable silence. Two women who'd fought battles that left no visible scars but changed everything beneath the surface. "What's next?" Margaret asked. "More side ventures? More companies to build?" "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe just this. Building Montgomery Industries into something worthy of its foundation. Supporting other women who've been erased. Being visible so others remember they don't have to disappear. That's enough," Margaret said gently. "More than enough. You don't have to save everyone." "Just myself," I agreed. "And maybe, in doing that, show others they can save themselves too." She left, and I stood alone on the balcony, watching stars appear in spaces where daylight had been, thinking about foundations and empires and the particular power of refusing to stay buried. A year ago, I'd come to this mansion desperate to be seen. Tonight, I'd come because I knew I was visible, not because someone granted me recognition, but because I'd claimed it, demanded it, built it into something so permanent that forgetting me became impossible. The chandelier inside threw light across the marble. I could see my reflection in the window. Midnight blue dress, straight spine, clear eyes. The woman looking back was familiar now. Not the girl from the cramped apartment. Not the wife who'd learned to shrink. Not even the fighter who'd clawed her way back. Just Elizabeth, co-founder, leader. Woman who'd been buried and refused to stay dead. Woman who'd signed her name in ink that couldn't be erased. Even when someone tried, especially when someone tried, I went back inside. To the celebration. To the empire. To the future I'd reclaimed and rebuilt and expanded into something that fit the woman I'd become. And as I walked across marble I'd chosen, under crystal I'd fought for, through space I'd designed, I realized something. They'd invited me to the gala to remind me where I came from. But the chandelier's reflection remembered something they'd forgotten. My name, not whispered in pity, signed in permanence, written into foundation that became empire. Empire that became legacy. Legacy that became lesson. For every woman who'd been told she was just the wife, just the support, just the foundation someone else got to build on. Remember, foundations can rise, can refuse burial, can become the empire themselves. And standing there in midnight blue silk, under crystal that caught light like captured stars, I knew I'd do it again, not because I needed to prove anything, but because some stories need telling, some foundations need claiming, and some women refuse to be footnotes. We write our own endings instead. They dressed her in silk to humiliate her. She wore midnight blue and called it power. They invited her to watch him celebrate. She arrived with documents and called it justice. They tried to bury her in the foundation. She rose. And the empire learned what every chandelier knows. Some lights refuse to dim. Some signatures can't be erased. Some women won't stay silent. And when they speak, the whole world remembers their name. If this story touched something in you, something about being forgotten, being erased, being told you were never enough. The next whispered story begins where silence ends, where women stop apologizing for taking space, where foundations refuse to stay buried. It's waiting on the screen. Let it find you.